I call to order this hearing of the Subcommittee on Europe, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats. Today's topic is the Balkans, threats to peace and stability. After the ranking member and I each take our 5 minutes to make opening remarks, each member present will have the opportunity to make an opening statement for themselves. We will then proceed with our first of two panels. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record. Building peaceful, democratic, and stable states in the Balkans has been an issue that's been close to me for many years. As I know, it's also been close to several of our friends here, especially when I hope that the ranking member might stop in, Mr. Engel, who has also been involved in the Balkans for such a long time. And I am pleased to be holding this hearing and thankful that we have an official from the State Department to take part in the hearing. As we are now at the start of a new Congress and the start of a new administration, this is an ideal time for us to reflect on the situation in the region and to recommit ourselves to playing a positive role in that part of the world. While the Western Balkan nations have achieved some major steps forward over these last 2 decades, including the independence of Kosovo, much remains to be done. Issues of governance, political development, corruption, judicial independence, media freedom, economic security, xenophobia, and reconciliation between democratic players in that region. Today, witnesses will get into specific details of the challenges and opportunities that exist in the region, but several points do appear very clear to me. First, while European integration provides a framework or end goal for the Balkan nations, that has proven to be an insufficient motive to inspire or compel political decision makers in the Balkans to do the right thing in far too many cases. Leadership from the United States remains absolutely essential. Obviously, Brussels can't hack it on their own. Second, we should remain committed to our shared values and hold the governments of the region accountable to the standards they profess. Perhaps we have been too tolerant of democratic backsliding and authoritarian politicians dressed up as Democrats. Third, at a time when foreign assistance and development aid accounts are set for reduction, they will be reduced. We need to rethink our points of influence and how we engage in that region. As an example, I'll remind the panel that I have put forward a plan for a mutual land swap, or would be more likely a border change between Serbia and Kosovo as part of a process of normalizing relations. If the Serb community in northern Kosovo wishes to be governed by Belgrade, they have every right, and we should acknowledge it. This is the same principle that led us to support Albanian Kosovars in their desire for self-determination. Border adjustments are not a magic bullet, but forcing populations to live in outdated borders or borders that are imposed upon them is a poor use of limited diplomatic resources. To help the subcommittee work through current issues and find creative solutions, we have an excellent panel of experts today. But first, we will be hearing testimony from the State Department, and certain activities of the State Department and USAID in the region have been subject to some controversy with allegations of impropriety being lodged, especially those from allegations that are actually presented by several United States senators. We look forward to the answers on those topics that have been brought up. So, Ranking Member Meeks, I'll yield to you for your opening statement, And anyone else after that who'd like to have a short opening statement? Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing to provide us with a timely update on the Western Balkans region. With the EU understandably consumed by domestic politics, we must not forget the importance and delicate state of progress in the Balkans. It is an opportunity to examine the tough issues and the potential for advancement for a region that is struggling to move beyond its history, outside influence, and difficult social and economic factors. I'm especially pleased to have Mr. Lee from the administration with us today. And as I've stressed throughout my tenure on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the work that our diplomats do in the field to advance American interests under difficult circumstances is undervalued. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your service and let you know that there is bipartisan concern. Thank you for collectively for what you've done, but there's bipartisan concern about the administration's planned budget cuts to the State Department. I'm not saying this because I'm worried about your job, Mr. Lee, and you think your job is okay. But I'm saying this today because I'm worried about America's place in the world and what a rudderless Balkan region would mean. The administration has not given our diplomats the tools or the human resources to do the daily diplomatic work in the Balkans. Without the appointees needed to direct the ship, the aforementioned vacuum will grow. Into this space comes the Kremlin, which exploits the troubles on the ground. Young political actors in fragile institutions are pressured by corruption, a dismayed population, and other temptation. In some cases, it is the Civic cultural ties with the Kremlin plays. Economically speaking, easy money talks. Corrupt Russian money has brought up critical infrastructure, flooded the airways with disinformation, and hung a cloud over democracy and transparency. We are all corrupt, the Kremlin narrative goes, and the West is made out not to be any different. History has proven that democracy requires hard work, attention, and investment from leadership. In Ukraine, for example, groundwork has been laid for reform. But with President Poroshenko at the top, who is reluctant to divest from his business, the work is easily undermined. Unfortunately for us, as of late, here in the United States, we have a leader who attacks the press, threatens our independent judicial system, which undermines our democracies, demands loyalty to him over country, and will refuse to have transparency with reference to his economics. It is immensely more difficult to encourage reforms when our very institutions are threatened here in the United States. Today, European politicians are growing skeptical towards enlargement. America, one can argue, is turning inwards, and with respect to the Balkans, and this autopilot approach is damaging. It is up to Congress to support healthy, democratic, economic, and peaceful progress on the ground. The United States has invested billions of dollars and many lives in order to ensure peace and prosperity in the region. I hope that in today's hearing we can examine the broader U.S. interests in the region, integration into Western institutions. Croatia and soon Montenegro provide proof that the European peace project is alive and still very attractive in the region. Macedonia, we learned of encouraging news as a government may soon be formed that will work to protect the rights of all minorities. Nevertheless, there are pockets of trouble on a micro scale that are bubbling to the surface. Government boycotts in Albania, Kremlin-supported coup and assassination attempts in Montenegro, and worries by ethnic groups are just a few of the current events that threaten to derail peace in the region. Governments there, as well as important civil society actors and members of the press, should know that we are concerned with the state of affairs after this hearing. We look forward to following up on what is discussed at this hearing. The Kremlin's work to destabilize the situation is not going unnoticed, but I fear if we willfully ignored or welcomed by some, there will be dangerous consequences for the region as well as the United States of America. So I look forward to hearing and having a constructive discussion where we can explore what Congress can offer and do to help, because the Balkans are very important in the global world order and to the United States of America. We cannot take our eyes off the prize of working with and in the Balkans. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Meeks, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. I just returned this past week from a very useful and informative Judiciary Committee trip to the Balkans, where we visited Bosnia, Albania, Macedonia, and Kosovo. And what really struck me at the time was the central importance to each of these countries that the U.S. continue to support their democracies and their deep gratitude for America's strong presence in the region, and the danger of any retreat from our participation or engagement in the region, as Congressman Meeks just outlined. There remain serious challenges to good governance, to judicial reform, to serious economic development, and to efforts to rooting out corruption. And I was reminded during the trip of the famous words of Winston Churchill, who once said, "The Balkans produce more history than they can consume." But what was very clear to me was that after many years of war and turmoil and change, the Balkans have found a fragile peace. And I strongly believe it's in the best national security interest of the United States to continue to support reform, development, reconciliation, and maintaining the peace in the Balkans, and that this is not a time for us to retreat in any way, but to continue to understand the importance of this region, the importance of our partnership with our allies in this region, and the danger of creating space for others with less virtuous objectives. And so I very much look forward to our hearing today, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is this working? I guess it is. All right. Our first witness is Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Holt Yee, and he was appointed to his current post in the Bureau of Europe and Eurasia in September of 2013. He is a career Foreign Service officer and previously stationed in Montenegro, Greece, and most recently as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Croatia. In the past, he served as Director for European Affairs on the National Security Council, and before that, he worked at NATO headquarters as Deputy Director of the Private Office to the Secretary General. So, Mr. Secretary, if you could give us 5 minutes worth of your thoughts, and then we'll give you some questions in return.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Meeks, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the situation in the Western Balkans. Over the years, Congress, and in particular this subcommittee, have played an important role in working with the countries of the region and in shaping an environment that advances U.S. interests, and we welcome very much this partnership. Mr. Chairman, although the Balkans no longer dominate international headlines as they once did, the region still faces enormous challenges that, left unaddressed, pose a threat to U.S. interests in Europe. Ethnic tensions throughout the Balkans are once again on the rise. The recent violence in Macedonia underscores the severity of its political problems. As progress in the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue stalls, stability in the Balkans will remain vulnerable. And without needed structural reform, Bosnia is at risk of becoming a failed state. Across the region, nationalism is growing and domestic political rhetoric is increasingly divisive. From tear gas in Kosovo's parliament to challenges from the Republika Srpska to the authority of Bosnia's constitutional court, nationalist politicians are openly testing democratic norms and institutions. Compounding the trouble, lackluster economic growth has failed to deliver the standards to which people in the Western Balkans have aspired. In no small part, this is due to significant public corruption and endemic weaknesses in the rule of law. Even more alarming, a small number of those who do not or cannot leave are increasingly vulnerable to the twisted message of violent extremism. ISIS and other violent groups are finding success in recruiting fighters and supporters from the Balkans. Finally, Russia is increasingly working to undermine progress in the Balkans, from a bold attempt to undermine the government in Podgorica to more subtle support for secessionist rhetoric in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Russia seeks to thwart advancement towards NATO and EU membership wherever it can. Since the end of the wars in the 1990s, we and our European allies have incentivized the necessary political and economic reforms and reconciliation with neighbors by linking these actions to eventual membership in the European Union and NATO. Those linkages have been powerful and effective, but there is reason to be concerned that they are losing their drawing power as the prospects for further expansion appear to dim. it is clear that we cannot take for granted stability and democracy in the Balkans. The risk of renewed conflict is on the rise, and the forces against democracy are growing. Left unattended, the problems of the region will fester and generate conflicts that will almost inevitably draw us in. However, with active engagement, we can keep this region on the Euro-Atlantic path and manage the challenges without a disproportionate expenditure of resources. Recent history has repeatedly shown us that there is no substitute for active U.S. leadership in the Balkans and strong partnership with the European Union. Our work in the Balkans helped make Americans safer as the countries of the region have partnered with us more effectively to fight terrorism and extremism and are becoming net contributors to international peace and stability operations rather than the subjects of them. On April 21, the United States ratified the accession protocol for Montenegro to join NATO. Montenegro's entry into NATO on June 5th will be the result of years of reforms completed with assistance from the United States and other partners. Montenegro's experience provides a clear example that structural reform strengthens a country's economy and democracy, allowing it to become a better and stronger security partner and ultimately a force for regional stability. When it comes to tracking and disrupting terrorist activity, we continue to have strong, willing partners throughout the Balkans, and they need our support. Excellent regional cooperation with Macedonia, Albania, and Kosovo broke up an attempted terrorist attack against an Albania-Israel football match in Shkodër last November. These countries in the Balkans can help us, however, only if they are politically stable and the region is peaceful. We continue to work towards that end, but more needs to be done. We have also developed a multifaceted approach to push back against Russian malign influence. Our focus on anti-corruption and rule of law reforms in the region forms the backbone of our strategy. Increased government transparency and accountability counters Russia's efforts to exploit corrupt practices that make countries more vulnerable to Russian pressure. We are supporting independent media and investigative journalists through small grants and training, and are sending American experts to the region to speak with opinion leaders. In order to reduce vulnerabilities, we're promoting energy security, including through diversification. We're also using our military assistance programs to counteract Russian malign influence by fortifying the human capital of militaries of the region and presenting options that allow countries to move away from overdependence on Russian military equipment. Mr. Chairman, looking ahead, we have much work to do, but also much to build on. I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify before this committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I have a few questions for you, and then we'll let Mr. Meeks proceed as well. And let me just ask, right now, how would you rate the peace, the basic issue that brought us into the Balkans in the first place was the peace with Kosovo and Serbia. And is that a peace that's holding? What are you expecting from that? Are you optimistic, or are you pessimistic, or what is your take on that peace?
Mr. Chairman, I'm optimistic about the prospects for reconciliation and peace, peaceful relations between Serbia and Kosovo. Since 2013, these two countries have been working to normalize their relations through a process facilitated by the European Union with strong U.S. support. And while the progress has been slow and at times painful, we believe it's headed in the right direction. There have been a number of agreements reached by both governments which a few years ago, back before 2013, many of us would have thought to be, if not impossible, extremely difficult. So there is agreement now on an agenda of items that were concluded, were reached agreement on in August of 2015. They're now in the process of implementing such agreements as the relations between the Kosovo Serb population with the rest of the country, and the elimination of parallel institutions. So there's no longer a Serb set of institutions and a Kosovo government set of institutions. There will be only one set. That's not to say that it will be easy to implement these agreements or that the relations will be always smooth. I'm certain there will still be more areas of disagreement and a lot of hard work going forward. But the important element that makes me optimistic is that the European Union and the United States government remain committed to helping these countries, along with other partners, to implement what they've already agreed and to go further to find a long-lasting solution.
Yeah, you mentioned about the European Union and the role it plays, but the European Union seems to be, from a distance, seems to be actually not in a situation where its power and influence is actually increasing. It looks like from a distance that it's even disintegrating back home. What is your prediction in terms of the European Union's weakening and how that will impact on the Balkans?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree that the incentive of EU membership, the drawing power of the prospect for many countries in the Western Balkan to join the European Union has weakened in recent years for many of the reasons you mentioned. However, what is important for both Kosovo and Serbia is that as they make progress on the reforms that they're being asked to make in order to become more compatible with EU standards, and as they make progress, that they're given positive feedback from the EU and from us. And it is still the case for Kosovo in particular, but also for Serbia, that if Kosovo will make the steps necessary, it will gain further rewards is too strong a word, but reinforcement from the EU that they're on the right path. The example I'd use, Mr. Chairman, is on the border demarcation agreement with Montenegro that Kosovo signed several years ago, which now needs to be ratified by its assembly. The European Union has assured Kosovo that if the assembly of Kosovo adopts this agreement, ratifies the agreement, the people of Kosovo will then get what every other citizen of Europe has, which is visa-free travel. And that is an important step forward. That is still a real possibility. So far, it's not been the European Union withdrawing that possibility. It's been Kosovo not willing, not able to take that step. And as long as these incentives are still valid, still exist, we and the European Union can still help them make these reforms.
So it'll be a positive influence. And one of the things that we've heard, and we have this letter from several United States senators, is that George Soros, who many of us believe holds beliefs that are contrary to what our country, what America is all about, and that he has actually been very involved in the Balkans, and also very involved in the Balkans in cooperation with various American programs. What programs have we been working with George Soros on? And is that a good thing?
Mr. Chairman, first, as a general statement, I want to say that recent stories, accusations about the Open Society Institute and Mr. Soros himself playing an outsized role in the Balkans are greatly exaggerated. And what I want to make clear to this subcommittee, this committee, is that the efforts by the United States government, by the European Union, are their own. In other words, we're not on the influence of any one person, any one institution, not Mr. Soros or anyone else. Rather, it's the other way around, that individuals and NGOs and other organizations are supporting what the European Union and the United States government have been promoting in terms of advancing the types of reforms, whether it's rule of law, fighting corruption, strengthening free media, strengthening independent judiciary, strengthening civil society. All these efforts are efforts that are led primarily by the international community, by the EU and US, where we've seen support from open society over the years, many years in the Balkans, has been particularly in the area of strengthening civil society, of citizens and citizen-led groups to become contributors to stability, contributors to the reforms that we believe also are important. So there has been some cooperation. There has been, both from the EU and there has been from the United States, some support to open society over the years in promotion of certain projects, but at a much smaller level than many people would be led to believe by some of the narrative that's circulating now about this disproportionate influence by Mr. Soros.
So you're confirming for us that indeed there has been cooperation with George Soros's projects, but they have been exaggerated in terms of the influence that Mr. Soros's organization have had.
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Meeks, you may proceed.
Thank you, and Mr. Secretary, again, welcome. Let me ask, and I think you touched on this in your remarks, that the Kremlin exploits weaknesses in the region, and we know that when we have ethnic tensions and economic malaise and high unemployment, lack of transparency, lack of a free press, and even the stalled progress toward the EU, that leaves a lot of space for the Kremlin to act. So my question to you is, what do you think are the Kremlin's goals in the region, in your humble opinion?